Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Toby Talks. I'm your host, Toby Hoy. And if you're new here, welcome to the party. Grab a coffee, grab a seat, grab a banana and blueberry smoothie if you'd like. Today's episode is one that I've been kind of sort of geeked out and excited to record for a while now because we're going to talk about a concept that I think is legitimately underrated in nearly every leadership and professional development circle that I've been a part of. Today, we're going to be talking about the theory of constraints. Now, I know some of you already heard the word theory and the word constraints in the same sentence, and you're already looking for the skip button. I get it. It sounds academic. It sounds like it's something that lived inside of an obscure business school textbook, right next to phrases and terms like synergize and leverage our core competencies. But stick with me for a few minutes because the theory of constraints might be the single most practical framework that I've ever come across for figuring out why things aren't working or why they're not working as good as they could. Whether we're talking about your team, your company, your project, or even just your personal productivity. And once it clicks, once it really resonates in your head, you will genuinely start seeing it everywhere you look. So let's dive right in. Let me start with a scenario that I think most of you will likely recognize. Imagine for a second that you're leading a team doing whatever. Everyone is busy. Everyone is working hard. There's genuine effort happening all across the board. And yet somehow stuff just keeps coming in late, or it gets done wrong, or you have the debrief after it's done and you all agree, well, we're going to do better next time. And then the exact same thing happens the next time. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, that's because the problem isn't effort. Let me say that again, because I think it is the single most important thing that I can offer you today. The problem is almost never effort, period. The problem is that your system has a bottleneck, a single point that is limiting the output of the entire operation. And until you identify and address it, it doesn't matter how hard everyone is working. The output of the entire system is capped by that one single constraint. That right there is the core insight of the theory of constraints. And it came from a guy who I kind of think deserves a lot more name recognition in leadership courses and leadership circles. His name? Eliyahu Goldratt. He was an Israeli physicist, managerial and management consultant, and genuinely an unusual combination of both. In 1984, he published a business novel. Yes, I said business novel called The Goal. And look, I'm going to say business novel and you're going to raise an eyebrow, and that's fair. It's not exactly a genre that has produced many hits, but The Goal is legitimately great. It follows a plant manager in the story named Alex Rogo, who has 3 months or is 3 months away from having his factory shut down. He needs to turn the place around fast. And he gets help from a former professor named Jonah, who keeps asking him infuriatingly Socratic method questions instead of just giving him the answers that he's looking for. Throughout the story, Goldratt lays out the theory of constraints in a way that actually makes it click for people who would never read a textbook, urge alone a business textbook. The book sold millions of copies, and it is still widely read today. And the framework that it introduced has been applied in manufacturing, in healthcare, in software development, education, financial services, and pretty much everywhere else that humans get together and do work collaboratively. So that's where it comes from. Now we'll talk about what it actually says. The foundational premise of the theory of constraints is this. Every system, everywhere, has at least one constraint, And that constraint determines the maximum output of the entire system. A constraint is anything that limits the system's performance. It could be a slow machine. It could be a person with a unique skill set that no one else has and only they can do. It could be a single approver in an approval change. It could just be an outdated piece of software, or it could be a policy or a rule. In the book, Goldratt used the metaphor of a chain. A chain is only as strong as its weakest link. You can reinforce every other link in the chain until it's made of solid titanium. But if the one link is weak, that's the failure point. The chain doesn't get any stronger just because you made all of the other links better. And here's the part that stings a little bit. Most organizations spend most of their time and money strengthening the strong links. They optimize the parts of the system that are already working fine because those parts are easier to improve and the wins are a lot more visible. Meanwhile, the constraint just sits there, quietly choking the overall performance of the entire operation. I like to think of this a little bit like a garden hose with a kink in it. You can crank the faucet as wide open as you want. You can buy a fancy new hose. You can get your whole team to stand around it offering encouragement and saying, "Go, hose, go." None of it matters or makes any difference until someone deals with the kink in the hose. The kink is your constraint. And until you name it and identify it and deal with it, you're just wasting water. So let's get into the actual framework. Goldratt gave us 5 steps for managing constraints, and he called them the 5 focusing steps. I love this name because it implies exactly what it is. A way to stop diffusing your improvement energy across 100 different initiatives and actually focus on the one thing that matters the most. So we'll break down all 5. Step number 1 is to, as simple as this sounds, identify the constraint. It sounds easy, but it isn't. Constraints are often hidden somewhere under the covers or under the hood. They hide behind busyness. They hide behind organizational politics where no one wants to point a finger at a specific department and say, that's the bottleneck. Sometimes it looks like the constraint is actually just a symptom of a constraint somewhere else in the process. The way that you find the real constraint is to follow the work. Where does the work pile up? Where does it backlog? Where do things slow down? What's the point in the system where if you just magically doubled its capacity, everything downstream would instantly move faster? That point right there, that's your constraint. It's often not where you think it is. And once you find it, the next 4 steps all flow from that single identification. So step number 2 is to exploit the constraint. Exploit it's an interesting word choice here, right? Because it sounds a little aggressive. It sounds a little negative. But what Goldratt meant is to squeeze every bit of productive capacity out of the constraint that you can before you do anything else. So in practice, this is something as don't let the constraint sit idle. Don't have it doing work that a non-constraint could do instead. Don't waste its limited capacity on low priority tasks. Make sure that it's operating at peak efficiency with the work that actually matters or only it can do. If your constraint is a specific specialist human, they shouldn't be in meetings that don't require their expertise. They shouldn't be doing administrative or clerical work that somebody else could handle. Their time and capacity are the single most valuable resource in the entire system. So treat it accordingly. If your constraint is a piece of equipment, don't schedule it for non-essential maintenance during peak production windows. Make sure that it always has work available so it is never sitting there idle and waiting for something else upstream. The key point here is that exploiting the constraint doesn't necessarily cost anything. You're not adding resources, you're not adding headcount, you're just being smarter about the resources that you already have. If this is done well, this step alone can produce significant improvements in the productivity of the entire operation. Step number 3 in the process is to subordinate everything else to the constraint. And this is the step that breaks people's brains a little bit because it requires you to deliberately operate other parts of your system at less than full efficiency. And that feels just wrong. So here's the logic there. If your constraint can only process a certain amount of work per day and everything upstream is producing more than that, then you're not helping the system. You're creating a pile ahead of the constraint. Work just accumulates in front of the constraint. Stress increases, quality can suffer, and the people at the constraint often will feel and are overwhelmed because work keeps arriving faster than they can actually process it. The solution there, the simple solution, is to pace the upstream work to match the constraint's capacity, not faster, exactly as fast as the constraint can handle. Now, if your metrics are measuring individual departments by their own throughput, this looks absolutely terrible. The upstream team seems to be slacking off. But if you measure the system's overall output, you'll see that subordinating the constraint improves results, period. Because the point was never to maximize how much each part in the process produces. The point was to maximize how much the entire system or the entire process produces. This is the step that requires leadership. It requires courage and honesty because you have to explain to people while you are deliberately throttling or slowing some things down. And that's a conversation that runs counter to most people's instincts about productivity. Step 4 in the 5 focusing steps is to elevate the constraint. If you worked through steps 1, 2, and 3, and the constraint is still limiting you, now you bring in additional resources. If it's a people issue, you hire more headcount. You buy more equipment if it's an equipment issue, or you outsource. You redesign the process. You do whatever it takes to genuinely increase the constraint's capacity. Notice where this particular step falls in the process. 4th. Not first, 4th. It's the common organizational response to a bottleneck is to just throw money at it immediately. New software, new headcount, new equipment, whatever it is in the particular scenario. And sometimes that is the right answer or the only answer. But if you haven't first exploited the constraint and subordinated everything else to the constraint, then you might be solving a problem that you don't actually have, or you might be solving a problem somewhere else in the process, or solving a symptom when the real constraint stays hidden. Elevation is the most expensive step in the framework. So use it after you have done the work to confirm that it's actually necessary. Step 5 in this process is to return to step 1. And here's the beautiful but slightly exhausting truth about fixing constraints. When you successfully elevate a constraint, it's no longer the bottleneck. That bottleneck is going to shift somewhere else in the system. Something else that used to be a non-constraint is now the weakest link in the process. So now your process starts all over again at step number 1. Identify, exploit, subordinate, elevate, and then repeat over and over and over again. This is a continuous improvement framework, not a one-time, short-time fix. The work in process improvement is never really finished because the constraint never permanently disappears. It just changes its address. And that's actually really great news because it means that there is always an opportunity to improve, always a next problem to solve, and always a next step forward. I do want to take a few moments here and talk about where this shows up beyond the factory floor, because I think the theory of constraints is sometimes written off as a manufacturing or creation only concept. And that's really a shame. So let's talk about knowledge work, office work specifically. In software development, there is an entire methodology called the theory of constraints, which is closely related to the concepts that you might already know, like lean development or agile. The key insight is that software development, the constraint is often not writing the code. It's usually review, testing, or QA, getting requirements clear in the first place, or the deployment pipeline. When development teams focus purely on writing code as fast as possible without accounting for where the actual bottleneck is, they create the kind of work pileup that we already talked about earlier. Features get written and then they sit in the queue waiting for review. Bugs get discovered late because testing got overwhelmed. Each individual component of that particular team looks productive, but the product isn't actually shipping on the truck. So applying the theory of constraints to software might mean slowing down how quickly code gets written and shifting some devs to maybe help with code review or testing if necessary, because that is where the constraint is. That sounds counterintuitive, and it is, but it absolutely works. In the professional services side of software, the constraint is often a specific senior person whose judgment is required at too many points in the workflow. Partners in law firms, as an example, or senior consultants or executive directors or whatever fancy title that those humans have, those folks have become the bottleneck, not because they're doing anything wrong, but because the system has evolved to route too many decisions through them and them alone. So identifying that particular constraint and then figuring out how to either protect that person's capacity or distribute the decisions more effectively can dramatically improve how much client work actually gets completed and then delivered. And in your own personal productivity, the theory of constraints is incredibly illuminating. Every single one of us has a personal constraint on what we can produce. It might be time, but I would argue that time is rarely the actual binding constraint. More often, it's focused attention, it's the ability to do deep, concentrated work without interruption. So if that right there is your constraint, then everything else you schedule needs to be subordinated to protecting it. Your most important constraint is your ability to think clearly and work on the highest value problems first. And yet most people's days are structured in exactly the opposite way, with shallow, reactive work filling the windows where focused, inclusive, thought inclusive work is actually possible. Exploiting that particular personal constraint means being aggressive about protecting your best working time windows. Subordinating means accepting that you'll respond to email maybe a little more slowly or attend fewer meetings and let some things just sit and wait. And if that is still not enough, elevating might mean looking at delegation tools or a complete schedule redesign if necessary. So I want to zoom out a little bit for a second and talk about the mindset shift that makes the theory of constraints actually work. because the 5 steps are mechanics, but the mindset is what allows those mechanics to do anything useful. The mindset behind all of this is to think in systems, not think in silos. Most of us have been trained in the workplace to think locally. How is my department performing? How am I performing? How are my individual metrics looking? How is my team doing relative to their targets? And those are legitimate questions, but they can lead you to a place where everyone is working locally and winning locally, and yet the system is losing globally. I have a favorite example for this that usually cleans it up in most folks' head. Imagine a factory that has 3 different workstations. Station A can produce 100 units per hour. Station B, which is the constraint, can produce 60 units per hour. And Station C over here can produce 80 units per hour. So if you run Station A at full capacity, you're producing 100 widgets per hour. But Station B can only handle 60. So 40 of those units pile up in front of Station B over and over and over again. Station A's local metrics look great. That system is creating inventory so fast that it can't be processed. So now the traditional mindset is to put pressure on Station B to improve. So Station B pushes it to getting 65 widgets per hour completed. That's an 8% improvement, but the pile upstream of Station B just keeps growing and growing and growing because Station A is still making 100 widgets per hour. And now Station B is stressed, quality slips, maybe people start cutting corners just to hit the numbers and to get the widgets through the door. The theory of constraint approach there says to run Station A at 60 units per hour and to match the constraint. And yes, Station A is now underperforming by 40%, but the system's actual output, the number of finished widgets rolling out of Station C, is now optimized. There is no longer a pile in front of Station B. There's no stress. There's a nice, even, steady flow all the way through the work stream. So measuring local efficiency while ignoring the system throughput is one of the most expensive mistakes that organizations will make. And it's really, really common. So we've covered a lot already, so let's land this plane. I want to give you some practical takeaways that you can actually start using this week. The first thing is to put on your scavenger hunt and go find your constraint. Pick one system that you're responsible for. And whether it's a team process, a personal workflow, or a project that just always runs late every single time, follow the work. Where does it pile up? Where does it slow down? And what would need to move faster in order to make everything else move faster? That right there is your constraint. Name it, write it down. The second is, before you add resources and throw money at the problem, exploit it first. If you've identified a bottleneck, resist the instinct to go higher or buy more immediately. Ask questions first. Is the constraint working on the right things? Is it spending time on tasks that could be done elsewhere? Is it sitting idle at any point of the day? And get the most out of what you have before you invest in more. The third takeaway is to check your metrics. Are you measuring local efficiency or system throughput? If your performance management system rewards departments for optimizing their own output without accounting for the overall system impact, you're probably reinforcing the wrong behavior. And that is a significantly harder fix, but it starts with awareness. You cannot fix what you don't know is broken. The fourth takeaway is to have the subordination conversation. If you're a leader and you've identified a constraint, you owe your team an explanation of why some of those things might be deliberately slow or slowed down or be deprioritized in service of the bottleneck. Don't just change the priorities without any context. People need to understand the logic behind it, or they'll resist it because if it genuinely does look counterintuitive from the inside. And the fifth takeaway is to embrace iteration. When you fix one constraint, another one emerges, and that's not failure. That is the system working as it should be. Keep going back to step one, make it a practice and a workflow and a cycle, not a one-off project. The theory of constraints is one of those frameworks that once you really get it and truly understand it, it feels like someone handed you a brand new pair of glasses. You start seeing constraints everywhere. There's one, and there's one, and there's one. In team meetings, your project plans, your own calendar, and every single organization around you. Goldratt's core argument was that common sense isn't actually that common when it comes to how organizations operate. We build overly complex systems and then optimize the wrong parts of them because we're not asking the right questions. The theory of constraints gives you the right question. What is the one thing that limits the entire system? Not what 10 things, not a list of opportunities, the one thing, the one single thing that is the constraint. Identify that, and everything else follows from there. So that's it for today's episode. If this resonated with you, I would love if you would write a review, share it with a colleague, or drop a comment wherever you're listening. Genuinely helps more people find the show. And if you want to go deeper on the topic, Goldratt's book, The Goal, is the place to start. It's readable, it's a story, and you probably will actually enjoy it. There's a follow-up also out there called It's Not Luck that extends the thinking into sales and strategy, which is worth your time if you get hooked on the first one. So thanks for spending some time with me today. Again, I'm Toby Hoy, and this is Toby Talks. Keep finding those constraints and keep pushing forward, and I'll see you next week.